Following the recent announcement made by President Donald Trump on the night of June 4th, 2025, new visa restrictions have been imposed on nationals from Sierra Leone, effectively banning 2026 diversity visa, that's the DV lottery, winners from entering the United States, among others. The proclamation has raised concerns among many ordinary Sierra Leonean citizens who had hopes of traveling to the United States. This morning, to talk more about this, U.S. support to Sierra Leone MCC Compact, among other things, we have the United States Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Bryan Hunt, who will provide a comprehensive explanation of the new entry restrictions, among other developments. Good morning, Ambassador. Thank you very much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be here.
It's been quite a journey for the world and the U.S. since the inauguration of President Donald Trump. Specifically, Sierra Leone has had its own here and there. There are people who are super excited about traveling to the U.S. Let's start with understanding these added restrictions. What led to this current situation that we're in?
Well, I know there's been a lot of speculation on social media and elsewhere as to the reasons the president signed the proclamation, but it really comes down to the fact that Sierra Leone is the 13th highest overstay rate for B1, B2 tourist and business travelers in the globe, and the 8th highest overstay rate for students and exchange visitors in the world. And because of those very high overstay rates that we've talked about before, that I've talked about with others in the media before, the president did not feel that he could continue in good faith to allow Sierra Leoneans to receive B1, B2 tourist and business and exchange visitor and student visas, and decided to impose restrictions upon those categories as well as upon a wide number of categories on the immigrant visa side.
But you wonder, why is this affecting those who played the DV lottery? So these are people who played, clearly stating their intention, wanting to relocate to the US. Through the US government's process, they got selected. So these are people who have already expressed intentions of relocating to the US. Why are they now affected?
Well, because the president decided to restrict immigrant visa travel to the United States other than in very specific categories, primarily those who qualify as immediate relatives of United States citizens or permanent residents. So those who have relationships in the United States, family reunification in the United States, which is something that we prioritize, will continue to be able to travel as immigrants to the United States. Other categories, because the president chose to restrict them, are not going to be able to do so. He's been fairly clear that his primary motivation here is to prevent illegal migration to the United States and to ensure that those coming to the United States are appropriately vetted. At this time, he did not feel that we could appropriately vet all immigrants who wanted to come to the United States, so he's imposed restrictions and prioritized those who have family in the United States over those who do not.
The feedback to this, for some people, they contextualize this to look like the righteous suffering for the wicked. Couldn't there have been other measures to, for instance, those that the U.S. government had issued a data saying they overstayed their visas? And the U.S. is one of the countries in the world that, is really good with its data collection and management. You have intelligence. You should be able to internally there in the United States track down those people who have overstayed using their visas, as opposed to stopping those who want to go. And because from your data, it's not 100% of all those who had gone that overstayed. There's a still huge the majority of those people who have gone on those visas have returned based on the data that the U.S. has provided. So why stop these people from going when the U.S. itself is not even sure those who are going to overstay and those who would come back? Why not take other measures to track down those who have overstayed within the U.S.?
Well, we're doing both. You will have seen since President Trump's inauguration a significant increase in the number of illegal migrants in the United States who have been deported to their home countries. That will continue, not just for Sierra Leoneans, but for all those who have illegally overstayed their visas in the United States. But at the same time, this persistently high overstay rate is one that we need to deal with. The president is acutely aware of the fact that this is not a one-time overstay rate, that these rates have been persistently high for some time. We have tried a number of other strategies in order to bring them down over successive U.S. administrations, including the first Trump administration, using a combination of stricter interviewing techniques, stricter controls at our border for those attempting to enter, public relations campaigns. None of those have brought the overstay rates down. So the president has decided that it is now time for us to pause in the issuance of certain visa categories, and it is only certain visa categories for Sierra Leoneans, take a comprehensive look at our internal processing, talk with the Sierra Leonean government about what more can be done to try to ensure the integrity of Sierra Leonean identity documents, civil registry documents, those things upon which we base visa issuance, and make sure that when we do resume visa issuance to Sierra Leoneans in these categories, and we will likely at some point resume issuance of visas, that those overstay rates will be much lower. It costs the United States a significant amount of money every time we have to track down and deport any national who has overstayed in the United States. And frankly, we don't want to continue, the U.S. taxpayer doesn't want to continue to have to expend that money. So their expectation is that we work not just on the back end in sending people back to their home countries, but also at the front end to prevent people from going who intend to overstay. So we're trying a new strategy, we're retooling, and I hope at some point, assuming we're able to come to an agreement with the Sierra Leonean government on new forms of cooperation, we'll be able to resume visa issuance in those categories.
Ambassador, Sierra Leone and the U.S. have enjoyed a very rosy, if I should describe it that manner, diplomatic marriage since 1961. It's now almost 64 years being together. There were highs and lows. It's like a roller coaster, actually. You know, not all rosy, but you get the gist. I wanted to ask, with all frankness, please, what effect can someone overstaying in the U.S. have or pose to your national security, or threat generally that someone can pose to America? Let's say a Sierra Leonean overstaying in the U.S. What threat can that possibly pose to your government that you would wish to, you know, return them to their country?
Sure, we've had situations where Sierra Leoneans who have overstayed their visas have committed serious crimes in the United States. Okay. Not saying that this is because they are Sierra Leonean or trying to disparage the Sierra Leoneans, most of whom go and stay and come back as they're supposed to. But the reality is that tiny, tiny minority that does commit crimes in the United States raises serious concerns. The president cited an Egyptian national recently who carried out an atrocious attack upon Jewish American citizens in the United States, essentially a hate crime. That individual probably should never have been admitted to the United States. And there are numerous other stories like that that are out there in our society. So even though it's a tiny minority that engages in criminal activities, a tiny minority of those who travel to the United States who choose to violate our laws, we have to take our border security seriously for that reason, in the same way that Sierra Leone takes your border security seriously. I know the work that goes into policing your own border. I've met with your Immigration and Customs Service. I know how seriously they take their responsibilities to screen those who are traveling to Sierra Leone to make sure that that criminal element does not come into your country. And we take that seriously in the United States as well.
I've actually been going through the statistics. I understand. I mean, I can never doubt the intelligence of the U.S. Sierra Leone is just 8.5. But we've risen to like 8.7 in the last 2-3 years since the last census. The population in Ghana, as at recent statistics, about 35 million people. Our number pales into utter insignificance when compared to countries like this. For Nigeria, for instance, there are about 227.9 million people there. Now, an article written by African News in 2024 states that, I quote, according to Africa, a newly released report from the US government highlights a notable shift in visa overstays pattern, showing Ghana surpassing Nigeria in misuse of B1, B2, F, M, and J non-immigrant visas between October 2022 and September 2023. So, Ambassador, in all honesty, wouldn't you say that we do not pose much of a threat to your country than perhaps some of these other countries with these huge, population statistics in Africa?
Yeah, so what I can say, and I brought the CBP statistics with me because I don't memorize every country.
Sure.
So Sierra Leone's overstay rate is above 15% for B1, B2.
Yes.
Ghana's overstay rate is 7.5%, only half of yours. So considerably smaller. Nigeria's overstay rate is 7.14%, again, less than half of yours, considerably smaller. Now, there are more travelers from those countries.
I understand.
There's no question. But we're not looking at total number of travelers. We look at the percentage of those travelers who use their visa appropriately versus the percentage who don't. So we're gravely concerned when any country hits above 10%. And when you hit 15% and are the 13th highest in the globe on misuse for business and tourist visas, that attracts the attention of the administration, and the president has to react.
Which brings me to the other question, Mr. Ambassador. How many visas, does the embassy, can issue on a yearly basis or an annual basis?
So,
how much have you given the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, so in fiscal year, the last fiscal year, I had the statistics for, there were, it's about 4,000 annually that are issued.
Do you actually give 4,000 visas to Sierra Leone?
B1, B2s. So that would be B1, B2 visas for tourists and immigrants.
In actuality, do you give out 4,000 visas to Sierra Leoneans on a yearly basis?
Yeah, that's about the number that we give out in tourist and business visas. We give many more. There's also other categories, but I'm looking at the tourist and visa category here.
Earlier on, you spoke about new measures or additional measures which would also require the cooperation of the government of Sierra Leone. We're curious to hear those measures and how can the government of Sierra Leone cooperate?
So I don't want to go into diplomatic discussions that I'm having with the government, but we are in the process of discussing with them ideas, concepts. This will be a dialogue, not the United States presenting a list of you musts. This is going to be a dialogue with them about how they can improve their civil registry management, how they can improve document security with passports, with birth certificates, with marriage certificates, with death certificates, all of the things that we use to establish identity, age, eligibility to travel. The specifics around what they should do on those, I think, is something that we have to dialogue with the government about to understand their processes, and then we can provide them some ideas on best practices, things that they might do in order to better secure those documents. Now, I fully accept the government cannot control an individual's behavior once they get to the United States, and nobody's asking them to do the impossible or the unreasonable. What we're looking at is how can we make sure that there are credible civil registry documents, credible identity documents upon which our visa officers here, our officers at the port of entry can base their decisions.
The U.S. Embassy had done, I assume, proper vetting of those who had applied for visas. Currently, there are visa holders who now are skeptical about the trip or their trips, whether or not it would hold. What's the fate of those who currently hold a visa, those who had their visas before the pronouncement?
So the president was very clear in the proclamation that we are not revoking current visas. So if you had a valid visa that was issued prior to the proclamation going into effect at midnight Eastern Standard Time today, then you are still able to travel to a U.S. port of entry using that visa like you were before to apply for entry to the United States through a Customs and Border Protection officer. Now, it has always been the case before the proclamation, and will always be the case after the proclamation, that at the end of the day, the interviewing officer has to be convinced that you are arriving for a legitimate purpose consistent with your visa. And they make the final decision, as they always have, on admission. But you are, if you had a visa, still free to travel to the port of entry to seek that admission.
The other concern of President Trump is with the citizenship status. People who go to the U.S., well, specifically in this context for Sierra Leone's case, pregnant women who go to the U.S. for the purpose of giving birth and then returning to their home country after obtaining a citizenship status for their children. You would say the category of pregnant women who actually have the wherewithal to go to the U.S. for delivery, because this isn't free again, this is something they pay for, is the upper class, the haves, not really the have-nots. What threat does this really pose to the U.S.? Or how does this inconvenience the U.S.?
This is a policy debate within the United States, and the president has made the decision that we are not going to allow what they call birth tourism going forward. So if the primary purpose of a woman traveling to the United States is to give birth so that her child will be a U.S. citizen, that is not going to be allowed going forward. That is an ideological debate within the United States that gets into a lot of domestic politics, questions about whether this is appropriate, what should U.S. citizenship be. As you know, the president has proposed, now tied up in the courts, a new interpretation that says that you have to be a legal entry, you have to be legally present in the United States in order to qualify to pass on citizenship to your child. So this is an active debate about the nature and context of U.S. citizenship that's taking place in our own country, and the president has the right and has chosen to exercise it to restrict that form of travel to the United States for the time being.
So there is that restriction now. You can't become a U.S. citizen automatically now by birth.
Well, you still do, because the court has enjoined the president from applying the executive order about whether one needs to be legally present in the United States to pass on citizenship to your child. So for most of the history of our country, certainly since our Civil War, the interpretation has been that aside from diplomats, if you are present in the United States and you give birth to a child in the United States, that child automatically acquires U.S. citizenship. The president and many in Congress have a different interpretation of the Constitution. Their interpretation is that in order to pass on citizenship, you have to be legally present in the United States. So you have to be there in a legal category in order to pass citizenship on to your child. The president issued an executive order instructing the executive branch to follow his interpretation. Several courts have now enjoined that application, saying that it violates their view of what the Constitution says. This will ultimately have to go to our Supreme Court for a final ruling. But for now, that executive order is enjoined, and anyone who is present in the United States, other than diplomats, pass on citizenship to their child when they give birth.
Sounds like medical tourism. Because, as I stated earlier, these women who go to give birth in the U.S., they pay for the service. It's not free. So that in itself contributes towards revenue generation. It contributes to the economy in the United States of America.
Yet some women pay for giving birth in the United States. Many others choose to use Medicaid or federal government or state and city government funding in order to pay for the birth of their child. Others, unfortunately, give birth and then leave the United States without paying their hospital bills in full for the delivery of their child. So there are categories where, in fact, we do not recover the cost for someone giving birth. But again, this is a philosophical debate, not about the economic cost and benefits of this. You're certainly laying out one point of view that's prevalent in the United States. But the other side's view is that only those who are legally present in the United States should gain the benefit of being able to have their children obtain U.S. citizenship. So they are very much of the view that U.S. citizenship should pass either from U.S. citizens to their children or should be restricted only to those who have followed our laws in coming into the United States to give birth. Now, as I said, this is something that's going to play out, I think, in our courts as well as in our political sphere, and there is a robust debate with people on both sides of the aisle. But the view of the president and the current administration is very much that we need to restrict U.S. citizenship to those who are either the children of U.S. citizens or whose parents were legally present in the United States at the time of their birth, and that we should not allow people to travel to the United States specifically to pass on citizenship to their children.
Mr. Ambassador, I understand that as of today, you will stop issuing some categories of visas. What are these categories?
So at this time, we are no longer going to be issuing tourist visas. We are no longer going to be issuing business visas. We are no longer going to be issuing student visas, and we're no longer going to be issuing what we call exchange visitor visas, which is another type of student visa. We're also restricting the issuance of immigrant visas. So for immigrant visas, it will be primarily restricted to those who have family members in the United States who are either citizens or legal permanent residents, and then a few other very specific categories that are not used very often.
When you said family, who do you refer to?
So it's immediate relatives. So it's what we call IR 1 to 5. So spouses of U.S. citizens, children of U.S. citizens and permanent residents, sons and daughters of them, parents. I think siblings are included in there. But if you have applied for an immigrant visa, if you are in category IR 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you will know that if you have applied which one you fall into, then you are still eligible to receive a visa to travel to the United States.
The news was flying on social media that the U.S. Embassy had sent correspondence to the airport stopping people with particular kinds of visas.
No, that is categorically untrue.
Okay.
First, the embassy would never do that. That's not our role. Any communication to transportation carriers, airlines, would come from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Service directly to those carriers. So no, we have not said anything like that. And as I said, the guidance is that those who have visas are able to travel to a U.S. port of entry in order to apply to enter the United States, same as they always were.
Mr. Ambassador, do you like football?
Yes, I do.
Which team do you support, if you don't mind?
So I follow DC United back home.
Okay. You know, we're approaching the World Cup.
Yes.
It's a huge global event.
Yes.
A lot of people will be, well, disenfranchised, if you like, you know, from Sierra Leone to attend these things. Do you think that is a problem already, or will it be a problem?
Yeah, so for those who are traveling to compete in the World Cup, the president has given a waiver so that those who are traveling to compete can still continue to do so, even if they are from one of the countries where they would otherwise be restricted. For spectators, I'm afraid that if they don't currently hold a B1, B2 visa, they will not be able to travel to the United States. at this time if they come from one of the countries that is either banned or restricted.
So, Ambassador, in all honesty, how long do you think this hiatus, if you like, or gap will exist for?
Yeah, so that's a difficult question to answer. The president has instructed that there be a 90-day review, so it will be in effect most likely for at least 90 days, during which time we hope to work with all countries in order to address whatever deficiencies have been identified. Where countries will fall after that 90-day review depends, I think, largely on where we are in the diplomatic discussions and their actions. He's instructed that after that initial 90-day review, that there be a review every 180 days of any countries that remain on the list, to make sure that we are allowing countries that are doing the right thing to come off of the list. And potentially, he's also said that if there are other countries that we find become deficient or suddenly show very high overstay rates, that they can be added subsequently to the list.
I understand that there will be people who had applied actually before this proclamation was published. What happens to them now?
So we are going to continue to conduct visa interviews, but we will not be able to approve visas. So if you have applied for a B1, B2 visa and have an interview scheduled, those interviews will remain scheduled at the embassy. But if you are found to be otherwise qualified for the visa, we will still have to refuse it under the presidential proclamation.
So in essence, you're saying that there's no need for these interviews, so push not sure.
That's a decision that everyone individually has to make, whether or not they want to keep their interview. That's not something that I can tell people whether they should or shouldn't. That's something they need to decide for themselves based on consultations with their lawyers and others going forward. So I don't want to say you shouldn't appear for your interview, but what I can tell you is that even if you are otherwise qualified for a B1, B2 or a student visa, we would have to refuse it under the presidential proclamation.
Until after the 90-day cycle?
Until after the proclamation is lifted, possibly at the 90-day mark, hopefully at the 90-day mark, but it will depend upon where we are in the discussions and the implementation.
For the people who had won the DV lottery, who was supposed to travel but now aren't traveling, what would be the overall outcome of their status? Is it that the trip would be postponed, or do they have to go through the entire process much later on if the DV process is resumed?
So if they have a valid visa, if they've already been issued their immigrant visa, they can still travel. Just like anyone else, they can still travel and apply for entry at the port of entry in the United States. This applies only to those who do not currently hold visas. So if you have not yet been issued your diversity visa, immigrant visa, we cannot issue it at least for the next 90 days. So they are going to need to wait until that 90-day period has expired before we could issue a new visa. And the presidential proclamation has been lifted. The reality for most DV holders who have not yet received their immigrant visa is that it is very unlikely, even if the proclamation were lifted at the end of 90 days, that they would be able to receive their visa before the expiration of their eligibility on September 30th of this year. If they do not receive their immigrant visa, then they would need to reapply to the DV lottery for next year. DV diversity visa status is only good for a single fiscal year.
Let's look at the MCC compact. Sierra Leone has had its own political disagreements with the ruling SLPP and the main opposition APC. The tripartite committee put together, and the speculation or assumption has been that the government only cooperated because the U.S. embassy was between the SLPP-led government and the main opposition, and one of the incentives for cooperation was the MCC money they were looking forward to, which is now not forthcoming. And we still see another disagreement brewing with the census situation and new districts being introduced. The MCC not forthcoming at this time could perhaps really, the absence of it could be the absence of that incentive for government to be able to sit together with the main opposition to quench or dilute chaos?
So I think folks overestimate the role of the United States in being able to bring the two parties together. I'm very happy whenever we can assist with something like that, but at the end of the day, the decisions that were made both by the SLPP and the APC, I think, were made because they recognized that they were in the best interests of Sierra Leone as well as the best interests of their own political supporters. So I don't believe that the absence of any incentives from the U.S. side is going to significantly alter what is in the best interest politically for the SLPP and the APC. I fully expect that they will implement what's contained in the tripartite agreement. They've made that commitment. Every discussion I've had with both the government and the opposition is that they both very much intend to move forward with that implementation. So I don't believe that that's going to be paralyzed. I'll also say, the New York Times article was full of speculation about what's going to happen with the MCC. Much of it, having just returned from Washington, I can tell you was completely untrue. In fact, the MCC is right now continuing as an independent organization and will continue to have projects overseas. The compacts that we have signed as of right now remain in force. The administration is, as is appropriate for new administration, reviewing all of those compacts to make sure that they're in line with administration priorities. But I do not think that at this time we should make any assumption that the Sierra Leone Compact is going away or is not going to be fulfilled. One, it's far too early in the process to make that assumption. And secondly, we as the U.S. government have made no statement or indication that we intend to do anything with the Sierra Leone Compact other than move forward with it. So we'll see how the process ultimately evolves, but I think it's much too early for anyone to be writing off the MCC Compact.
Overstay in the U.S., is it the method that the people who overstay use that is the issue, or it's the overstay itself?
It's the overstay itself that we're concerned with. The fact that someone has chosen to violate our laws and remain beyond their legal period of admission is in and of itself a concern to the United States.
How do we juxtapose that with even the U.S., for example, people from the U.S. who come to Sierra Leone on official visits, and at some point they fall in love with Sierra Leone and decide to make Sierra Leone home? We have seen those people. We had Peter Penfold, who was an ambassador at some point. He fell in love with Sierra Leone. He got back, and Sierra Leone almost became home to him. We've seen other, whether it's Americans, people from the UK, different parts of the world who come to Sierra Leone, as underdeveloped as Sierra Leone is, who fall in love with the country and just choose to stay. You would say that's a common human factor, to get to one location and say, oh, I've fallen in love with this place, I changed my mind, I'm not going back home, I'm going to make here home.
Well, I hope that those who fall in love with Sierra Leone, at least from the United States side, don't simply stay. I hope they comply with your immigration laws, do what is necessary to legally adjust their status, and remain in a legal status in Sierra Leone. That's all we ask of Sierra Leoneans going to the United States. If you choose to enter the United States and then subsequently decide you want to stay, you marry an American citizen, you take a job with a U.S. company, as long as you adhere to the process to adjust your status from that of a non-immigrant to a different category, that's fine. We have legal pathways that people can use to do that. And what we ask is that people use those legal pathways if they wish to remain. The problem is the Sierra Leoneans we're talking about who are overstays are not those who use the legal pathways. They are those who chose not to use the legal pathways and just remain without changing their status to that of a legal immigrant, a legal permanent resident. That is certainly permitted. What is not permitted is simply to decide, well, I have a B1, B2 visa, I'm in the United States now, I'm just going to stay here, which a lot of people do, unfortunately.
It's a good thing you've clarified, Mr. Ambassador, because before now we thought the U.S. doesn't just like people lingering around.
Yeah, we are very much a country that's based on the rule of law. We welcome those who want to come to the country legally. We encourage people to come legally. We have provisions in the law that allow for adjustment of status of those who meet the criteria that's required under our law. What we cannot tolerate are those who simply come and then, without following our laws, decide to remain in the United States.
So, Ambassador, let's talk about education for a while.
Yes.
You know, the applications have just closed for this year's Fulbright application. I'm sure it's the same for all the other programs like Hobart Humphrey and the likes, the early. What's the fate of those programs going forward?
So I don't know yet what is going to happen with those categories of exchange visitor. The presidential proclamation allows the Secretary of State to issue national interest exemptions to the normal restrictions. We don't yet have guidance as to what those national interest exceptions will consist of, what the criteria will be for those. When we do, we will of course apply them. How broadly they will apply, whether they will cover U.S. government-sponsored exchange visitors like Fulbright scholars, Humphrey scholars, other types of scholarship program, I cannot say at this time. We just don't have that guidance yet.
Are the processes continuing as they are, or have been, without any interruption?
So
after the application, will you be vetting these applications?
Once we receive the applications, we will do the vetting and we will determine eligibility based upon however much money is made available by our Congress for those programs in Sierra Leone. And then we will attempt to move forward, assuming there is a path forward for exchange visitors in those categories. But as I say, I don't yet know what may come forth from the Secretary of State. Those decisions have not been communicated yet.
Particularly so when you know that even if you proceed with these processes, you will not be issuing any student visas.
As of right now, we have no authorization to do that. As I said, there may be at some point things coming down from the department that would change that. But as of right now, if somebody today were to apply, we would have to deny the visa.
The U.S. is a very huge development partner to Sierra Leone. What exactly is the embassy working on at the moment?
Well, we're working on a number of things. So first, in the health sector, we're in the process of transferring all of our health development assistance from USAID to the State Department. That will happen on the 1st of July. So as you can imagine, that involves a lot of reviewing, determining which projects to continue, which ones need to be modified, moving money between agencies, making sure that we do not lose continuity of care as we are making this transition. So we're heavily focused on that right now. In the next fiscal year, we'll probably spend very similar amounts to what we spent in the previous fiscal year on health. We will probably do that through fewer mechanisms because we want to gain the efficiencies of having fewer implementing partners. That means fewer overhead costs and more dollars actually getting to the programs. So we're looking very closely at that. We're also looking quite a bit at commercial development these days. We're running forward with a number of projects through our Development Finance Corporation that are in the design phase. We're looking very closely at how we can help Sierra Leone develop its critical minerals sector, the expansion of the Sierra Rutile into their Phase 2. We're looking at what we might be able to do with some of the new discoveries that were made in the World Bank Geological Survey. We're looking at how we can assist in the energy sector, both through the Nant Energy project, which is still moving forward with DFC, but perhaps expanding that into a broader LNG project for the region. I've got a number of other investors that are looking at doing things like building an oil refinery here in Sierra Leone, so we're working on assisting those. And we're looking, frankly, at infrastructure as well, how we can help with bridges, with roads, those sorts of things through our private sector and through our trade and investment agencies like DFC. Right now, the priority, having just got back from Washington over the weekend, the priority that I heard consistently from senior levels of the administration was private sector investment, private sector trade, private sector development, do everything we can to use U.S. government tools to support our private sector as it seeks to help move Sierra Leone forward on its development journey. So that's very much going to be the focus moving forward. I think you'll see much more money moving through entities like the Development Finance Corporation, the Trade and Development Agency, the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Agencies we haven't always talked a lot about in Sierra Leone, but agencies that have been active here that look at Sierra Leone as a very important developing market and really want to be engaged in moving the country forward.
Like companies, corporate entities, corporate social responsibility does help beyond the help it renders in their communities. It sort of better situates them, the respect accorded to them in that community. You could take that situation and perhaps mirror that to what governments do across. We see the UK, the US, China, other nations try to help underdeveloped countries, foreign aid, many different things. Sort of that soft power for that extra reverence that they give to certain countries. At a time like this, when more and more countries and continents are sort of trying to intensify their relationships with some African countries, where does this leave the reverence, the love for America, the fear of America, the respect for America when aid is being withheld, all these restrictions? Where does this leave the image of America in the eyes of non-Americans, particularly Africa?
So my view has always been that if we're going to move Africa towards development, it has to be through a private sector model. Governments should not be the primary creator of jobs on this continent. It has to be business. Governments are not the ones who are going to ultimately increase household wealth. It has to be businesses. Governments, frankly, are not going to be the ones that can afford to do the infrastructure development. It has to be led through the private sector. And that's the new mantra that the United States is adopting. We tried the model through USAID, frankly, since 1960. The sad reality is we are still working on many of the same issues that we were working on in 1960. And that means that we've not made the progress that we need to in the development sphere, not just in Sierra Leone, but across the continent. And that means we need to try something different. And I think this new focus on really using the private sector, using U.S. government development dollars to de-risk private sector investment is the way that we're going to see Africa move forward. And I think ultimately, as Africans see the benefits of this, the respect, the warm relations, the warm feeling to the United States will still be there. Now, we're not backing out of the things that really only governments can do. We are going to continue being a leader in humanitarian assistance, feeding people who need it, making sure people who are in dire straits get medicines. As the Secretary has made very clear, those life-saving interventions will continue to be the priority of the United States. That's where we will put the traditional development dollars that will run through the State Department. But when it comes to other areas where it's not about saving lives, it's about trying to actually move the economy forward, we're going to partner with the private sector, who are the ones who should be the engines of growth, moving the economy forward and really change that dialogue.
For the visa restrictions, what happens to those who had applied for universities in the US who had gotten their visas? And what happens to those who had applied who had not gotten the visas?
Yeah. So if you already
have paid their tuition?
Sure. Well, if you've already have your student visa, you are free to use that to travel to the United States. just as you were before. You will apply with that visa for entry with a Customs and Border Protection officer. That person will ultimately make the final decision on admission to the United States, but that process will go on as it always has. For those who do not yet have student visas, we're not going to be able to issue student visas until such time as the presidential proclamation is lifted. So if you do not have a student visa, and you have already been accepted into the university, you need to talk with your university because you are unlikely to be able to begin this semester. Now, many times universities will happily delay admission for a year or a semester. Certainly in this situation, universities will be understanding about the fact that students are not going to be able to show up at the start of term in August because we won't yet be at 90 days to even begin the review. So I think for those students who were not able to get their visa prior to the proclamation going into force, it's time to have an honest conversation with your university that you're not going to be able to start in the fall semester, and to talk with them about delaying to either the spring semester or to next fall.
In your clarifications this morning, you said that those people who even qualify for B1 visas, who have not gone for their appointments yet, their interview, even when they go through the interview, even though they're eligible to get the visas, they would be denied. They would not be given the visas.
That is correct.
But what happens after the 90 days review? If the proclamation by the president, by President Trump, is lifted, would they be then given their visas, or do they have to go through the application process all over again?
You're asking a question to which I don't yet have guidance from the department, so I don't know is the answer to the question. I do not know whether they would need to reapply. I do not know whether there will be an automatic issuance of those who are denied under the proclamation when the restrictions are ultimately lifted. It's just a question we do not yet have guidance on. It's not been the focus of policymaking in Washington. The first focus was dealing with the immediate presidential proclamation and getting those immediate guidance into effect. Those sorts of questions you're asking, just like the national interest exception question, are ones that will come out, I'm sure, in the following weeks and months. But as of right now, I don't know.
So for those people who would be eligible to get the visa, who only would be denied because of the president's proclamation, would their visa fees be refunded?
No. No, we don't refund visa application fees because the fee that folks pay is not a fee for issuance of the visa in Sierra Leone. There are some countries where there is an issuance fee. Sierra Leone is not one of those. So for Sierra Leoneans, the fee that you pay is the cost of processing that application and conducting the visa interview. Just like those who are refused for any other reason, we do not refund visa fees because it is an application fee, not an issuance fee.
The restrictions, are they for Sierra Leoneans or for Sierra Leone? I asked because you would find that there are Sierra Leoneans who also apply for U.S. visas through other U.S. embassies in other countries. Yep. And also in Sierra Leone, there are other nationalities who apply for a U.S. visa in Sierra Leone.
So it applies to Sierra Leonean nationals, so those who carry a Sierra Leonean passport and are applying for a visa on that passport, regardless of where you apply. For those who are not Sierra Leonean nationals and not one of the other 17, I think, in total that are on the list of restricted or banned, that visa processing continues as normal. So if you are, for example, Nigerian or Ghanaian or Liberian and applying in Freetown, you are still free to do so and we can still issue your visa. The restriction is on Sierra Leonean nationals. For Sierra Leonean nationals who apply in a third country, the restriction would still apply. For Sierra Leonean nationals who have two passports, so you have nationality of both Sierra Leone and, say, the United Kingdom, you are still free to travel on your United Kingdom passport. So it is only for those who are traveling on their Sierra Leonean passport that the restriction would apply.
So, Ambassador, let's come back to the situation. What's the way out? I mean, the statistics are there. You said that people are overstaying in the U.S.
Right.
What can you do to solve this?
So I think some of this is personal responsibility. People need to use their visas appropriately, and we've talked about this before. Individual decisions have implications for the broader citizenry of Sierra Leone. So people need to take responsibility and be civic-minded and use their visas for the reasons that they were issued, and then return when their stay is done in the United States. So that's part of it. In terms of what can the government do, which I think is what a lot of people here are asking, I would say we're going to have an active dialogue with them, but what it fundamentally comes down to are questions around the security of civil registry documents, the availability of criminal records, the availability of court records, so that we can adequately vet those who are going to be traveling to the United States. So I think strengthening civil registry document issuance, making sure that there is searchable databases that are available that we can use to verify those civil registry documents, making sure that there are searchable databases of criminal records that include all criminal records from Sierra Leone, making sure that court records that talk about criminal convictions are available, arrest records are available. Those are the sorts of things that President Trump is primarily concerned with and believes that foreign governments can do in order to resolve this matter. Obviously, no one expects the government to be able to force its citizens to return to Sierra Leone. That's beyond its capability. But what we are talking about really is around the security and availability of civil registry documents, criminal registry documents, court records.
Are government officials also caught up in this crossfire? Are they affected?
So if they are traveling for official or diplomatic business in the United States, no, because they use a different category of visa. So those who qualify to travel on government business to the United States for either business with the United States or business with international organizations like the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank, they will still be able to get their visas and travel and conduct that business in the United States.
The UNGA summit is approaching. Will this particular new situation, if I should say, or mirror of things unfolding, affect people who will be going to the United States to participate in the UN program?
No, if they are government employees, they are still eligible to receive what we call a G visa, which is the type of visa that allows them to travel for the UN General Assembly, or for any other UN business, or for IMF business, or for World Bank business.
Let's say they're not government people, they are journalists, media people.
So journalists do not travel on B1, B2 visas. If you are going to report as a journalist, you travel on what's called an I visa. And I visas are still available, and we can issue those. So if you are a journalist traveling for business purposes to the United States to cover the UN General Assembly or to do any other sort of reporting in the United States, you are still eligible to receive an I visa.
For people who travel to the US for medical checkups, can they now still make those trips?
If they have a valid B1, B2 visa, yes. If they are trying to apply for a B1, B2 visa, no, they're not able to get one.
What about in exceptional cases of medical emergencies? Because obviously,
Yeah.
even the US is aware that our medical infrastructure in
Sure.
country cannot in any way be compared to that of the US.
Sure. So at this time, I don't yet have guidance on national interest exceptions. The Secretary of State was given the authority by the President to make those. We don't yet know what may be contained in those. So the answer is I don't know at this time how the Secretary will choose to treat those cases.
There are those who were scheduled to travel to the US or intending to travel to the US who are either grossly pissed or grossly bitter about these restrictions. How can the Sierra Leonean population contribute to the solution to this problem of Sierra Leoneans overstaying in the US?
Well, so I would hope
Being that
yeah.
everyone else is now affected.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope if they were planning to travel to the United States in the next 90 days, they would have already had their visa, because people really should apply well in advance of their travel for a variety of reasons, including eventualities like this. But for those who are caught up and want to contribute constructively to the discussion, I think the best thing that they can do is, one, to encourage friends and family members who are traveling to the United States, who do have visas, to use those visas in line with the purpose for which those visas were issued, to abide by the laws of the United States, to return on schedule. I think at this point the government has been very forward-leaning and wants to collaborate. So I don't think there's need for significant public pressure on the government in talking with a wide variety of government officials. The question has been, what can we do? How can we resolve this? They seem very committed to trying to meet whatever the concerns are that President Trump has. The information minister was very clear in his interview with the BBC that that was the approach the government was taking. So I think that your government really does want to lean forward and be cooperative on this, and will continue to engage with them.
For the percentage of Sierra Leoneans overstaying in the U.S., what passport categories are those? Are they just people holding ordinary passports, or do they include diplomatic and service passport holders?
So we don't track the type of Sierra Leone passport that individuals travel into the United States on when we're doing these statistics. We track the U.S. visa category. So it is possible for a diplomatic official to go on vacation to Disney World with a B1, B2 visa. I don't know how many of those who overstay may have been in that category of diplomatic passport holders who were traveling for purposes other than diplomatic purposes. I can say that we do track the overstay rates for other categories of visas, including A's and G's and I's, and there's a whole alphabet list there. The rates in other categories are lower than in the B1, B2, for overstays are lower than in the B1, B2 and student visa categories.
But in those categories, do you know if it's the type of passport?
Yeah, that's not a statistic that DHS tracks, because we're primarily interested in the category of U.S. visa. I don't have numbers on that as to how many of those with B1, B2 visas had ordinary versus service versus diplomatic.
So, Ambassador, earlier you said the U.S. is open to people who would wish, or want to change their status in the U.S. I want to believe perhaps the problem also with this thing we are seeing is lack of education. Do you think that all of these people who are staying there know that they can actually do this through legitimate means?
So most of those that we end up deporting from the United States would not be in categories that would have qualified to adjust their status. Oh. The vast majority of those are folks who had no legal right to work in the United States, but chose to remain to do that anyway without going through the proper procedures. So they would not just automatically be able to adjust status. One has to fall within certain categories to do that. Just like under Sierra Leonean law, I can't just decide to stay in Sierra Leone. I have to meet the criteria under Sierra Leonean law. We also have criteria, and most of those that we end up deporting did not meet that criteria, and that's why they chose to overstay. Now, there may be some who just didn't realize the opportunity was out there, and certainly I believe that we are doing a better job now, particularly under the Trump administration, of making people aware of what they need to do in order to be in legal status in the United States. And I think the increase in deportation certainly is an incentive for folks to find out that information and to adjust status, and we are seeing more of that happening now than in the past.
Mr. Ambassador, if you could help us diminish our idiocy around this, educate us a bit this morning. What criteria were you referring to that would otherwise legitimize someone becoming a citizen?
Yeah, there are several paths to changing status in the United States. The two most common: I'm a student I fall in love, I marry an American citizen, I am now the spouse of an American citizen. That is by far the most common way in which people adjust status. The other way is I'm a student in the United States, I am recruited by a US company to work for them following graduation. They file paperwork with the Department of Labor that meets the necessary criteria, and then you receive the paperwork that says you are now offered a formal job by a US company. You can now adjust status in order to remain in the US to work for that company. Those are the two most common ways. There are other ways involving investment and things like that, but those are the two that we see most frequently.
Lastly, you also said that there are people within this category of, or sects of people who have overstayed in the US who do not actually qualify to change their status.
Right.
What criminalizes them?
So under US law, if you are not in a legal status, a legal visa status, you have committed what we call a civil violation under US law, meaning that you can be fined and you can be removed from the United States.
What does this mean? How does it look like an illegal visa status?
So I go to the United States on my B1, B2 visa.
Okay.
When I arrive at the border, they stamp me in. That stamp says you can remain for 90 days.
Oh.
I choose to stay for 120 days because, for whatever reason, I decide I'm going to ignore the 90-day and stay for 120. On day 91, you are out of status. You have committed a civil violation in the United States, and you are subject to both fines and removal from our country.
The U.S. Embassy, prior to now, didn't conduct interviews for government officials to travel to the U.S., but you have incorporated that. Why are government officials now being interviewed?
So we've always done some amount of interviewing of government officials. We have expanded that in close consultation with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to make sure that all of those traveling meet the relevant criteria under our law to qualify for an A or a G visa. It is not every government official that we are interviewing. It is those that we and the ministry have agreed require an interview to verify their bona fides of travel.
What informed that change in pattern?
Consultation with the visa section at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We want to make sure we have a shared interest in making sure that all travelers meet the criteria. There were some that inadvertently slipped through who were not government employees. Not by any malfeasance, just by misunderstandings, and it was determined that to avoid that in the future, that we would, for people who were not clearly approvable, we would conduct interviews to make sure that they complied with our law and were given the right category of visa, because it is very inconvenient both for us and for the Sierra Leone government when someone arrives at the port of entry with the wrong type of visa and ends up either being refused entry to the United States or paroled in. It's messy. So both sides agreed that it was better to do the work up front to make sure that every traveler who was going for official and diplomatic business met the criteria under US law for that visa category.
To Sierra Leoneans who have never been to the U.S., with hopes and dreams of getting to the U.S. someday, should they give up on that dream in the nearest future?
Well, what I would say is that we're in a temporary pause. This is not intended to be forever. I'm sure it will not be forever. It is intended to be as short a time period as necessary to address the concerns that President Trump had. And we will do that as expeditiously as possible. So I would say, this summer is probably not the time to try to take your vacation in the United States, but give it till next summer, and my hope is that things will be resolved long before then.
Any departing messages?
Well, I think the important thing to emphasize is that the United States remains committed to a very strong working relationship with Sierra Leone. We are going to continue to engage across the full range of activities. We are committed to working with the Sierra Leone private sector and the U.S. private sector and the government to meet the development challenges that lie ahead for the country. And we are determined, as the Secretary has said many times, to continue to be a strong partner both here in Sierra Leone and more widely within the African continent.
Just out of curiosity,
yes.
How much does the U.S. Embassy in Sierra Leone receive annually through visa applications?
How many applications do we receive?
No, the figures financially. How much money comes in through?
So the embassy doesn't. So the embassy doesn't receive any of that money directly. That goes to the Treasury in the United States. So it does not. It does not. I don't see the figures that come through. Collect? What do we collect? I don't know off. I don't know offhand. I'd have to look that up. I'm sure we have the figure, but we don't. I don't track that because it's not money that I get to spend. So it's not revenue for the embassy operations.
Right. Well, thank you so much indeed, Mr. Ambassador Hunt. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. How many dishes have you tasted, by the way, before I leave you?
Oh, quite a lot at this point. So.
I told you to try gari goat soup.
Yes, I had gari soup. Yes, it was lovely. Yes, yes, I had that. I think I had that when I was out in Kailao, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's where they prepared it for me, but it was quite nice.
So the next recommendation, since you've tried gari goat soup, you should try two things: mango ebe.
Mango ebe, okay.
Ebe. Then you should try paste and brush. Just ask them what's paste and brush for Mo.
Okay, I will find out what those are. Paste and brush, okay.
Right, this is Wake Up Sierra Leone here on AYV Television and Radio. We've been speaking to the U.S. Ambassador to Sierra Leone, Bryan David Hunt.